My name is Tania Hart. I'm a part-time PhD student here at the Greenwood Institute. I've been studying for six years now and have come to my end stages of my project. And my study was specifically looking at how we can better support children aged 14 to 16 years with identified mental health difficulties in mainstream education. Obviously, my study primarily focused on English children with emotional disorders like depression, anxiety and post-traumatic stress. However, I'm hoping that some of my findings will be useful for yourselves in other countries as well. It was a qualitative study whereby I interviewed children, and then I also interviewed their parents, and then I also reached out to their supporting teachers in order to get a better insight into how they perceive they can be better supported at school, and also how this relates to how their teachers and their parents feel that they can be better supported at school as well. I had some interesting findings, obviously some different perspectives. Very often adults' perspectives is very different to the children's perspective, and these were adolescent children, very articulate, very clear as to what actually they thought would help them at school and how they could be helped. And what I found was, by interviewing them, they had a priority of need. I've drawn here on this sheet. Imagine a priority of need being triangular, yeah, and their first priority of need was school safety. Okay, so school safety, meaning school had to feel both psychologically and physically safe. And what threatened their safety was bullying by their peers, peer fallouts. Very often these children, because of their mental health difficulties, will be susceptible perhaps to peer fallouts. There is also an argument that these children might be more susceptible to bullying. But they definitely appeared to sometimes have their school safety threatened by those factors, but also other factors hindered them. For example, one of the key findings was that stigma, very often mental health stigma, made them feel very uncomfortable at school, so they had to mask their difficulties and they didn't feel that they could talk about their difficulties because they feared that people might label them as a freak or mad or whatever, and all they wanted was to feel that they fitted in at school. So it's very important for everybody involved with the children, especially teachers, to be very vigilant and safeguard against those security threats. Okay, so unfortunately children often don't tell teachers that they feel unsafe because of the shame of mental health stigma, or the shame of being bullied, or the embarrassment of peer fallouts, and sometimes even they might have difficulties with teachers themselves, teacher differences. So it's very important that staff and other workers observe, and they can observe the small traits that might suggest a child is feeling unsafe at school. So for instance, more asking to leave the class, or not attending school, alienating, things like that, or teachers observe them with peers and friends, whether they appear isolated, whether they're having frequent fallouts, or whether they approach teachers when they're having problems, or whether they tend to isolate themselves and not speak to teachers. All these little signs, actually might suggest that they're actually not feeling safe at school. So, if we don't get safety right, we can't really help the children. So it's very, very important that we observe very carefully to ensure that they feel safe. But if we have an inkling that perhaps they're not feeling safe, then we need to look at school security. It's very, very important when it comes to school security that we connect children. What tends to make children more emotionally secure at school is positive connection to teachers and to peers. So if we notice peer fallouts, bullying, then we might nurture friendships and do a little bit more activity around that, perhaps group activity in classrooms which nurture friendships. We might actually consider assigning them a special teacher if they're not connecting to a teacher, which is quite important. So it's about really focusing on that connection. But if we also want to connect them to a teacher, it's very, very important that the teacher has some understanding of mental health difficulty, so some awareness of mental health problems. Not a lot of awareness, but just some simple understanding of how anxiety might affect a child, how depression might affect a child, and how post-traumatic stress might affect a child. Because in that way, then they can build more stronger relationships with the child, because the child will feel that the teacher has some understanding and will feel more confident in disclosing any difficulties or disclosing any problems. It's also extremely important when we're looking at school security that we deal very sensitively with any disclosure, any sort of emotional disclosure, and we deal very sensitively with confidentiality, remembering these children very often feel stigmatised because of their mental health difficulty.